Kara Shalom, thank you for joining the Bible journey. We are in Season 1, Episode 7, and the reading will be from Genesis 4, verses 1 to 16. In case you missed the discussion of previous chapters and verses, you can find the link at the top and in the description below. So far, we have learned about God's creation and how it was all done in God's 6 days. Genesis 2 gives us a more detailed account of the creation of Adam and Eve. In chapter 3, we are learning about the first sin. Eve is deceived by the serpent, and Adam does nothing to stop her from sinning. He willfully sins with her. Then God gives them an opportunity to confess and say they're sorry, but they don't. So God pronounces judgment on their sin. In the end, we see how God banishes them from the garden, but how He also provides for them and introduces them to atonement sacrifices. From Genesis 4 onward, the account moves away from Adam and Eve and focuses more on the human race in general and their descendants in particular. Here we are introduced to the lineage of Cain and later to that of Seth, the son whom Eve believed was born to replace the murdered Abel. Let's read and then look into what this means for us today. Genesis 4. Now Adam had sexual relations with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant. When she gave birth to Cain, she said, "With the Lord's help, I have produced a man." Later she gave birth to his brother and named him Abel. When they grew up, Abel became a shepherd, while Cain cultivated the ground. When it was time for the harvest, Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. Abel also brought a gift, the best portions of the firstborn lambs from his flock. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but He did not accept Cain and his gift. This made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. "Why are you so angry?" the Lord asked Cain. "Why do you look so dejected? You will be accepted if you do what is right. But if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you. But you must subdue it and be its master." One day, Cain suggested to his brother, "Let's go out into the fields." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Afterward, the Lord asked Cain, "Where is your brother? Where is Abel?" "I don't know," Cain responded. "Am I my brother's guardian?" But the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are cursed and banished from the ground which has swallowed your brother's blood. No longer will the ground yield good crops for you, no matter how hard you work. From now on, you will be a homeless wanderer on the earth." Cain replied to the Lord, "My punishment is too great for me to bear. You have banished me from the land and from your presence. You have made a homeless wanderer of me. Anyone who finds me will kill me." The Lord replied, "No, for I will give a 7-fold punishment to anyone who kills you." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain to warn anyone who might try to kill him. So Cain left the Lord's presence and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. The NLT uses the phrase sexual relations, which almost sounds mundane. Some translations use the phrase knew each other, which suggests a deep spiritual as well as physical relationship. Eve gave birth to 2 boys, Cain and Abel. Some commentators believe that they must have been twins. When I read this, I thought, no way, this is not what I was taught in Sunday school. So I decided to look into it for myself. Here's the reason why some people believe the idea of twins. All through the Bible, we read that a man knew his wife and then a child was born. Here in Genesis 4, we read it in verse 17 as well as verse 25. The relationship is mentioned prior to the birth of almost every child. In Genesis 38, where Judah had relations with his wife, the Bible first said they knew each other, and then she became pregnant. Then it says she conceived again and gave birth to a son. But here, in verse 1, the sexual deed is mentioned only once, and then it said Cain was born, and later Abel was born. It also says when they grew up, suggesting that they grew up together. There is also no mention of anyone being older than the other except for Cain being born first and then Abel. That being said, in Genesis 25, verse 20 to 26, the Bible clearly states that Jacob and Esau were twins. So why was the same not said for Cain and Abel, if they were born twins? It might be because of the relationship between Cain and Abel would be very short-lived, literally, and that of Jacob and Esau would usher in a time of conflict for many generations to come. The other mention of twins is in Genesis 38, verse 27 to 30, where Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Judah, gives birth to 2 boys. Again, they are specifically mentioned as they will both carry on the line of Judah, and Jesus will eventually be born from the line of Perez, the firstborn of the twins. So maybe those 2 sets of twins were specifically mentioned because of their combined significance to the history of Israel. There's no mention of Abel having children, so it might be fair to assume that he died childless, and thus his line ended with no significant contribution to Israel's future. It doesn't really matter whether they were twins or not. They both lived, and poor Abel served to be the first victim of murder in the history of the world. Eve names her firstborn Cain. The name means to get or acquired. She says she produced or acquired a human, a boy, with God's help. It seems that she sees Cain as the promised one mentioned in Genesis 3, verse 15, the one who will strike the snake and thus bring relief to their troubles. When Abel was born, she saw it as a waste. She had no need for Abel and thus named him vain or vapor. His name basically means of no use. Abel didn't mean anything to her. She based her hope on Cain. But it wasn't going to be that easy. Cain turned out to be less than stellar. The boys grew up, and Abel had a flock of sheep, and Cain was a farmer, both noble professions. Neither profession is better than the other. So the following situation was not based on what the men chose to do for a living. It went much deeper. When it was time to make an offering to God to initiate the harvest, Cain brought some of his harvest to God. In contrast, Abel is said to have brought the best portions of the firstborn lambs. There are two significant points here. First, the Bible makes a distinction between the quality of the two sacrifices. Cain brought some of what he had, and Abel brought the best of what he had. This immediately brings Cain's intent into question. How seriously did he take the sacrificial rituals? Was he serious about his thankfulness and devotion to God? As it was harvest time, it was perfectly fine to bring a gift of grain or fruit, but it had to be of unblemished quality. It should be the first and the best from the harvest. Abel's harvest was the firstborn lambs, so he brought the best quality of those who were born to his flock. He understood that God wanted the best, and he obeyed. For him, it was not just a ritual. He obeyed out of love and reverence for God. God accepted Abel's gift. Abel had the right intent and acted positively on it. Cain just followed the rituals. It seems he didn't really care. We as Christians sometimes have the same situation. We follow religion, religious rituals, but not the God of those rituals. The second point is the type of sacrifice. It doesn't seem to have been a sin offering or an offering that required a blood sacrifice. It probably was just an offering to thank God for the harvest. It really had nothing to do with Cain bringing fruit instead of meat. It had to do with his attitude. God did not accept Cain's attitude. Cain got really angry. Now, why would he be angry? Isn't it that sometimes when we are caught doing something we shouldn't, that we jump into defense mode? We get angry, hoping people would then leave us alone and not ask any questions. This anger is also born out of jealousy. Cain saw God accepting Abel's gift and how his own gift was rejected. He must have been very unhappy. However, he didn't try to find out what he did wrong. He simply sulked. The Bible said he looked dejected. Now, Cain was not a happy camper. He was so angry that God had to ask him about it. He didn't do some introspection about why God didn't accept his gift. He didn't think that maybe the problem lies with him, not God. Cain doesn't seem to answer God here. Then God warns him that sin is waiting for him. 1 Peter 5 verse 8 warns us that the devil is like a roaring lion waiting to attack us. In James 4 verse 7 it says we should resist the devil or sin and he will flee from us. God tells us to stand firm against sin. Unfortunately, just like his parents, Cain would not get his story straight with God. He doesn't ask for forgiveness, and instead, his anger turns to jealousy and deception, and eventually to murder. Cain asks his brother to go with him to the fields, and there he kills him in cold blood. He knew exactly what he was going to do. This was premeditated murder. The Bible teaches us that if we repent, God is forgiving and merciful. Take David as an example. Among the sins he committed was adultery, a sin punishable by death, and also conspiracy to commit murder. He had Bathsheba's husband killed, and yet he repented with bitter tears and beautiful songs to God. And in God's eyes, David was righteous. He was a man after God's heart. we can be made righteous through repentance and the blood of Christ. God asks Cain about his brother. It's not like God didn't know what had happened. He wanted once again to give Cain a chance to come clean. But instead, Cain is rather insolent. He kind of challenges God. In my childhood, my mom would have said he's backchatting God. His defiant answer to God's question is again so typical of his defensive character. Am I my brother's guardian? It's like he's saying, how should I know? I'm not supposed to watch over him. Actually, yes, definitely yes. We are each other's guardians. We need to look out for each other and take care of each other, like Christ is taking care of us. God says, what have you done? This is not a question of God not knowing. It's more a case of exasperation on God's part, not another one. God tells Cain that he knows about Abel and how he died. He says Abel's blood cries out to him. Abel's blood calls for a reaction from God, and God gives a reaction. He banishes Cain and curses him. Now, in the short span of 4 opening chapters of Genesis, God seems to have done a lot of cursing. First the snake, then Adam and Eve, and the land they should live on, and now Cain. Where's the loving God Christians want us to believe in? Let's see. God sends Cain away from the land he has cultivated, because it now has Abel's blood on it. He warns Cain that no amount of hard work will yield any good results for him. He will be homeless and wander around with no real purpose. This does not mean he will sleep in the open and be alone. It means that he will be away from God's presence. Cain used to have a fairly good life, but because of his sin and his unrepentant attitude, he lost everything. You can't play games with God. He knows all and sees all. Cain's reaction to God's curse is insane. He had just committed a series of sins, even to the point of murder. Yet he whines that his punishment is too harsh? Really? Now he worries about being killed? And here the love of God and his compassion become evident again. He asks nothing of Cain. He even promises to protect him and that he will avenge him 7-fold. He gives Cain a mark of some kind so that people will leave him alone. God does not ask for his blood in return for the murder of his brother. Just like we don't get the punishment we deserve because of God's grace, and also if we accept Christ as our Savior. The land of Nod is east of Eden. The word Nod means something like wandering or away from. Cain is now away from God. His family was already outside of Eden after they were banished by God because of Adam's sin. Now Cain will move away from God even more. And it's interesting that he settled east of Eden, the side where God placed the cherubim to guard the entrance to the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3, verse 24. Cain does not go back to God ever again. In fact, about 7 generations of his descendants are listed, but not one of them is mentioned as having any relationship with God. We will see in chapter 7 that even though these descendants are listed, no one talks about them again after that. One can assume that there were more descendants, but that they probably perished in the flood. The story of Cain is a sad commentary on the human condition. From the beginning, God kept wanting us to turn back to Him. He gave us a free will to worship Him. He doesn't want a forced love out of fear and apprehension. He wants us to feel free to approach Him. Unfortunately, many people don't see it like that. They either believe that they don't need God or salvation through Jesus Christ, or they feel that they've been so bad that not even God can forgive them. Where do you stand? Please believe that nothing you have done will ever be too much for God to forgive. Just turn to Him and ask for His mercy and forgiveness. Thank you for walking with me today. So far, we have talked about some prominent whodunit figures in the Bible. God the Creator, Satan the Deceiver, and all the minor actors like Adam and Eve and Cain. Join me again next time for a closer look at the descendants of Cain and how they were actually the first industrialists. May God bless you and keep you. Vaya con Dios.